Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ali. I'm a junior doctor working in Cambridge, and this is another episode of the Study With Me vlog series. So, as usual, I wake up at 7:30 in the morning, but lie in bed like a waste man until 9 a.m. Between 9 and 10, I get out of bed, have a shower, make some coffee, eat some leftover pizza for breakfast, and tidy the house a little bit. I then grab the boosted board and head over to the hospital to meet up with a student from Germany who was in Cambridge for an interview and wanted to have a chat. By the way, if anyone ever wants to meet up in person, I have a standing offer that I'll buy you a coffee in Cambridge if you happen to be around. I get home around 12 o'clock and work through some of my Japanese course on Rosetta Stone, which is my favorite app for learning languages. I've been using Rosetta Stone for the past few months, and I love how it teaches you some vocabulary up front, but then you end up picking up other bits that they didn't explicitly teach you, and this feels really rewarding. 男の子は走っています。 It's become a personal project of mine to get my Japanese skills up to speed so that when I visit Japan, hopefully in the next few years, I'm not allowed to speak anything other than Japanese to get around. If you're interested in learning a language, you can use my 50% off promotional code to get a 2-year subscription for just £5 a month. And if you're shopping for Christmas presents for loved ones, why not forego materialism for a year and give them the gift of learning instead with the Rosetta Stone subscription? More details in the video description. Anyway, from around 1 p.m. onwards, I get down to actually do some work, and I continue working through the ALS Manual, which stands for Advanced Life Support, basically a course in resuscitating patients who have, died or are acutely deteriorating and are about to die. I start by revisiting my active recall questions that I wrote yesterday, as shown in the previous Study With Me video, and this is, of course, spaced repetition in action. As always, while reading through the coursebook, I'm highlighting stuff that's new to me or particularly interesting. I turn some of these highlights into questions that I'll go through later today, but also when I'm revisiting the subject in a few days' time. A point I want to make is that I don't religiously turn every single highlight or piece of new information into a question or a flashcard. This is a mistake students often make when we first get started with this whole active recall thing, and we end up with thousands of flashcards that we never ever have the time to actually go through. There's no real hard and fast rule for what warrants a flashcard and what doesn't. It is something you pick up through familiarity with the subject. When you see a piece of new information and you can judge how relevant or important it is and whether you need a flashcard at all to remember it. This is why it's so easy to make too many flashcards when you're first getting started with the subject, because everything is new and you don't know what you'll end up picking up without needing flashcards at all. In general, I like to write 2 types of question for myself. The first is discrete facts, like drug dosing or mechanisms of action or nerve supplies to a particular muscle. Discrete facts that you either know or you don't. These lend themselves nicely to flashcards or to questions in my spreadsheet. The second type of question I like to set myself starts with the phrase, what's the deal with ... For example, in this study session, I write the question, what's the deal with synchronized shocks? Now, flashcard enthusiasts would not like this question because it's vague, it's open-ended, it's not specific. However, I think it is a fantastic question for testing your understanding of a subject. So, when I see this question, I imagine myself explaining it to one of the junior medical students. So I'd probably explain how shocks delivered with a defibrillator can be synchronized or unsynchronized. The synchronized refers to whether the shock is delivered at the same time as the R wave in the QRS complex. Unsynchronized shocks are used for the classic shockable rhythms of ventricular fibrillation and pulseless ventricular tachycardia, i.e. it doesn't matter when in the cardiac cycle you deliver them. If, however, we're dealing with a ventricular or supraventricular tachycardia and the patient is unstable but alive, we need to synchronize the shock to the R wave. Because if the shock came in during the T wave, for example, when the ventricles are repolarizing, then that has the potential of flipping the patient into VF. And this is why we need a synchronized shock for unstable tachycardias while the patient is alive. But obviously there's a lot of jargon in there, it sounds pretty verbose, and if I were to turn this into a proper flashcard and write out the answer in full, it would be really long and probably not worth it. But the fact that I've got a question saying, what's the deal with synchronized shocks, as a question for myself, means that when I see it, I run through this reasoning in my head, and if I notice that there are holes in my knowledge, I open up Google and look it up. There's no need for me to write the whole answer out in full in a flashcard because it's far quicker to just Google it if there's a hole in my knowledge. Anyway, now we're at around 2:30 p.m. and I start to get bored of studying, and so I write out the script to yesterday's Study With Me video. Wow, this is getting very meta. The Study With Me videos are the only ones that I write out scripts for because then I can record the voiceover first and worry about fitting the footage to it later. I then spend another hour and a half having some more leftover pizza, making some tea, playing around with the lights in the living room, and calling my grandma on WhatsApp. At around 4 p.m, I head into town to get a birthday present from my mum. Cue B-roll sequence. Standing underneath the lights, looking into each other's eyes. Tired snowflakes are coming down, collapse into water when they hit the ground. That evening, we grab dinner at Tycoon, a cleverly named Thai restaurant in the town centre, and I get home by around 8:30 p.m. I spend the next 2 hours continuing the process of going through the course manual and again, writing active recall questions for stuff that's new or that tests my understanding in a good way. At this point, I want to make 3 points about study techniques. Firstly, let's talk about active recall. Hopefully, you'll have seen my evidence-based study tips video where I talk about why active recall is the most efficient study method, but I seem to get questions all the time from students worried about what counts as active recall. This is always a bit confusing for me because active recall just means testing yourself. It doesn't matter how you do it, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't matter if it's flashcards or Anki or Quizlet or Google Sheets or writing out questions by hand. What matters is that you're testing yourself in one way or another. So yeah, active recall isn't complicated, it just means retrieving information from your brain. You can do this however you like. For example, you could write down everything you know about a topic without looking at the book, in the form of a spider diagram or a bullet point list or an essay or literally whatever you want. Or you can do what I do and answer these little questions that you've set for yourself. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that you're testing yourself. You are retrieving information from your brain. Secondly, another thing I do in these study sessions is that when I've finished with a chapter, before moving on to the next one, I glance back through my active recall questions for the previous chapters and make sure I know the answers to all of them. This, again, is spaced repetition, which is the second pillar of efficient studying. But spaced repetition isn't just what you do the next day and the next week, it even works when you repeat stuff in the same day. And if you haven't yet seen my video dedicated to spaced repetition and talking about the evidence behind it, I'll put a link in the top right corner and also in the video description. Finally, I want to point out that while I'm going through the chapter on rhythm strip analysis, for example, I'm covering up the answers so that I can test myself as I'm going through it. I was very tempted to just forget about this and read through it, but I had to actively fight the temptation to take the path of least resistance. Testing ourselves is always more work than just reading, but it's that added effort that encourages the links to form in our brains. So don't be disgruntled if your studying feels like effort. It's supposed to, and the more effortful it feels, the more effectively you'll encode and retain that information. Right, now we're at 10:30 p.m. and I've had enough. I realized at this point that I'd been working for the last 2 hours with only a toilet break in between, which is pretty good going. I sense myself starting to lose interest and I see that some quite information heavy topics are coming up, so I'll save those for another day. I then wind down before bed with a hot bubble bath and some reading on my Kindle. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, then please consider doing so. Have a lovely week and I'll see you in the next video. Good night.